The seat I chose made me her fiancé, and she's the most dangerous princess in the galaxy. In the grand halls of the galactic capital, the air was thick with the hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses. It was a night like no other, a celebration marking the unification of some of the most powerful star systems in the galaxy. Diplomats, military leaders, and high-ranking officers from all corners of the known universe had gathered to mark the occasion. The banquet hall glittered with opulence, its massive crystal chandeliers casting a soft glow over the sea of silks and uniforms. Among the crowd, a young officer stood at the edge of the room, his eyes scanning the scene. To the untrained eye, he might have appeared out of place, a mere low-ranking officer lost amidst the grandeur of the event. But Lieutenant Aiden Cole knew better. His invitation had come from a source more powerful than anyone in the room realized. The invitation wasn't about the celebration itself. It was about the opportunities hidden beneath the surface. His uniform, neatly pressed, blended in with the sea of formal attire, but there was a sharpness to his gaze, a curiosity that went beyond the glitzy surroundings. Aiden had heard whispers of political tensions, of power struggles that had been brewing for years. Tonight was only a part of a larger game, one that the young officer wasn't fully aware of yet, but he was about to be thrust into the heart of it. As he wandered through the crowd, his attention was drawn to the dais at the far end of the room. At the center stood a woman, tall, poised, and impossibly beautiful. Her dark hair cascaded like a waterfall down her back, and her eyes, cold and calculating, swept over the guests. She wore the insignia of the Vanter dynasty, the symbol of one of the most powerful families in the galaxy. This was no ordinary woman. This was Princess Seraphine Vanter, heir to the throne of the most dangerous dynasty in the known universe. Aiden had heard of her, of course. Who hadn't? The whispers about her were legends in themselves, stories of her ruthlessness, her brilliance, and her unmatched skill in combat. Some even claimed she could take on entire armies and win. But she was also a mystery. There were few who truly understood the depths of her ambition, her motives, or her desires. She was a woman wrapped in power, and power in the galaxy was a rare and precious thing. Aiden didn't plan to approach her. He wasn't a fool. He had a job to do, observe, gather information, and remain unnoticed. But fate had other plans. As the night wore on and the guests continued their mingling, a sudden shift in the atmosphere caught Aiden's attention. The murmurs of conversation died down, and all eyes turned toward the entrance. The grand doors swung open, and there in the doorway stood Princess Seraphine herself. Her presence was enough to silence the room completely. Even the most seasoned politicians seemed to hold their breath. Aiden felt an unfamiliar knot tighten in his chest as her gaze swept across the room, seemingly without pausing, until it locked with his. For the briefest moment, he thought he saw something in her eyes, an unreadable glint, almost like recognition. But before he could process it, she was already moving toward him. He instinctively took a step back, but it was too late. She was already at his side, her every movement graceful, almost predatory. The crowd parted as she approached, the air thick with anticipation. No one spoke, no one moved. All that existed in that moment was the princess and the officer. "Lieutenant Cole," she said, her voice smooth and cold as the steel of a blade. "I see you've chosen a rather interesting seat." Aiden blinked, caught off guard. How did she know his name, and why was she addressing him directly? He stammered, trying to gather his thoughts. "It's an honor, Your Highness." Her lips curled into the faintest of smiles, but there was no warmth in it. She didn't need to speak. Her presence alone commanded the room. "Honor," she repeated as though tasting the word. "Perhaps, but not the kind I was expecting." Before Aiden could respond, the princess took a seat beside him, without invitation or ceremony. The world seemed to hold its breath as she settled into the chair, her eyes never leaving his. The weight of her gaze felt like 1,000 tons pressing down on him. "You've taken a seat at the table of power, Lieutenant," she said softly. "Did you think it would come without consequence?" Aiden's heart raced, and for the first time in his life, he understood the meaning of true danger. He had no idea what game he was being pulled into, but he knew one thing for certain. His life had just changed forever, and it was no longer in his hands. The conversation that followed was like a dance, her questions calculated, his answers carefully measured. But the tension in the air was palpable. Aiden felt the eyes of the entire room on him, watching, waiting for him to reveal his true purpose. But what was his true purpose? He had no idea. He was just a lowly officer, yet here he was, sitting next to the most dangerous woman in the galaxy. As the night wore on, the political maneuverings around them grew sharper and the stakes higher. No one dared approach their table. The princess and the officer remained locked in conversation, the rest of the room a blur of voices and shadows. But Aiden couldn't shake the feeling that, by the end of the evening, his life would be forever tied to hers. And when the banquet ended and the lights dimmed, Seraphine Vanter did the unthinkable. She took his hand, pulling him to his feet. "You are mine now," she whispered, the promise in her voice sending chills down his spine. "And you will do as I command." The future of the galaxy depends on it. Aiden's world tilted on its axis. What had seemed like a simple night of diplomacy was now the beginning of something far more dangerous, far more complex. He was no longer just an observer. He was part of a plan, one that had the power to shape the galaxy itself. And the princess's grip on him was not one he could escape. The days that followed the banquet were a blur. Aiden had expected some measure of normalcy to return after the event, but instead, he found himself caught in a maelstrom of political tension. The princess had made it clear, his life was now intertwined with hers. But what did that really mean? He wasn't sure, but he was certain of one thing: there was no turning back. In the following weeks, Aiden was summoned to the palace almost daily. He was assigned to missions with military officers who had no idea why he was there or why he had suddenly become the princess's personal shadow. Some of them, despite the prestige of their positions, treated him with disdain. They thought him nothing more than a pawn in a larger game, and in a way, they were right. But Aiden was learning quickly that he wasn't a simple pawn. The more time he spent with Seraphine, the more he began to realize just how much power she wielded. And how dangerous that power could be. The palace was a world of its own, a place of gold and marble, where secrets were traded as casually as pleasantries. Aiden had been given access to areas of the palace no outsider had ever seen. Every room was meticulously designed to reflect the Empire's grandeur, but beneath the opulence, he could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy. Political maneuvering was the true currency here, and everyone was playing their part. One evening, after an exhausting day of meetings and briefings, Aiden found himself alone in the princess's chambers. He had grown accustomed to these private moments, though he still didn't know if he was meant to be her confidant or just another piece on her chessboard. Seraphine had her own way of keeping people at a distance, even as she brought them closer. She was like a star, radiating power, yet untouchable. She was sitting at a grand desk, looking over star maps of the galaxy, her focus entirely on the plans laid before her. Aiden stood by the door, unsure if he should interrupt. But she didn't need to ask him to enter. He had long since learned that, when it came to her, there was no question of whether he belonged in her presence. He simply did. "Come in, Lieutenant," she said, not looking up. Her voice was cold but not unkind. Aiden obeyed, stepping further into the room, though he could feel the weight of her gaze now on him. "Have you seen the projections?" she asked, motioning toward the large screen showing the galaxy's star systems, each one marked with colored dots. Aiden stepped closer, studying the map. "It's an impressive network, Your Highness," he said, doing his best to sound respectful, though a part of him couldn't help but feel a little overwhelmed. "But what does it mean?" Seraphine smiled, a slight tilt of her lips that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It means everything, Lieutenant. It means the balance of power is shifting. The entire galaxy is at a crossroads, and there are those who would rather see it burn than see it united under my rule." Aiden's heart raced. He had always known there were conflicts brewing in the galaxy, but this was the first time he was hearing it from someone who held so much influence. The stakes had never been clearer. "And what is your plan, Your Highness?" She turned to face him then, her eyes cold and calculating. "I have no intention of waiting for things to unfold on their own. I'll make the galaxy bow to me." She said it so matter-of-factly, as if it was already a done deal. Aiden tried to remain calm. "You want to rule it all?" "I will rule it all," she corrected, her voice like ice, "and I'll use every resource at my disposal to do so." She stood up from her desk and walked toward him, her footsteps echoing in the silence of the room. "Including you." Aiden stiffened, unsure of where this conversation was going. "Me?" "Yes, you are not just a figurehead in this game, you're part of the strategy. I'm not asking you to love me, Lieutenant. I don't need your affection, but I do need your loyalty, that is all." Aiden wasn't sure how to respond. He had always believed that loyalty was something earned, something given freely. But Seraphine wasn't asking for trust. She was demanding it as if it were her right. "I'll follow you," Aiden said finally, unsure if it was his choice or if he had already been swept away by forces far beyond his control. "But tell me, what is it that you really want from me?" She tilted her head slightly, studying him with an intensity that made Aiden's skin crawl. "I want you to be more than just my fiancé, Aiden. I want you to be my equal. You will help me shape the future of this galaxy, not as a puppet, but as a partner." Her words rang in his ears. Equal? Partner? Aiden had never imagined himself in such a role. He had always been a soldier, a man who followed orders without question. But this was different. The responsibility that came with such a position was overwhelming. And yet there was something about her, something fierce and unyielding, that made him question his own place in the universe. As the days turned into weeks, Aiden found himself being pulled deeper into Seraphine's plans. The missions grew more dangerous, more intense. He was no longer just following orders, he was helping to orchestrate them. Together, they began to lay the groundwork for the galaxy's future, one move at a time. But it wasn't easy. Aiden began to see the cracks in the facade of the princess's perfect empire. She was calculating, yes, but she was also fragile in ways he hadn't expected. She trusted no one completely, not even him. She couldn't afford to, and yet Aiden couldn't help but wonder, could he really be her equal? Or was he destined to be nothing more than a tool in her quest for power? The galaxy was watching, waiting for the outcome of this dangerous game. And Aiden, though unsure of his place in it all, was determined to see it through. He wasn't sure where this journey would take him, but he knew one thing. Whatever happened, he wouldn't go down without a fight. The days grew colder as the political atmosphere in the galaxy became more tense. The princess's enemies were numerous, and her supporters were not as loyal as they seemed. Aiden had begun to see just how delicate the balance of power was, and how every decision he made could shift that balance in a heartbeat. He was no longer just a low-ranking officer who had stumbled into an event. He had become a key figure in Seraphine's plans, her constant companion. Their missions together had intensified, becoming more dangerous with each passing day. It seemed like the more Aiden understood the complexities of Seraphine's world, the more the lines between right and wrong blurred. It was on one of these missions, far from the capital, that Aiden truly began to understand the full weight of his situation. Seraphine had tasked him with retrieving a rare artifact from the distant planet of Xiphus, a planet known for its treacherous landscape and its powerful but hostile inhabitants. The mission seemed straightforward enough: infiltrate the planet, retrieve the artifact, and return. But there was something in Seraphine's eyes when she gave him the assignment that made Aiden nervous. He was not just going to retrieve an artifact, he was being tested. Again. The planet of Xiphus was a barren wasteland of sharp cliffs and endless deserts. It was home to the Xiphians, a race known for their fierce resistance to outsiders. The Xiphians had never allowed anyone from the Empire to claim their treasures, and they had fought off every invader for centuries. Aiden knew that getting in and out would require all of his skills, but he had no choice. Seraphine's order was clear. She needed the artifact, and she trusted him to get it. As he landed on Xiphus, the air felt dry and oppressive. The planet seemed to close in around him as he stepped off the shuttle, the wind carrying the scent of ancient dust. His mission was simple: find the artifact, a piece of ancient technology that could give Seraphine a strategic advantage over her rivals. It was said to be hidden deep within the ruins of a long-abandoned city, and the only way to get there was through a vast desert that few had survived crossing. Aiden adjusted the straps of his pack and began the long journey across the desert. The heat was unbearable, and the sand seemed to stretch on forever. With every step, he could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him. This was no longer just about completing a task. This was about proving his loyalty, proving that he was worthy of standing beside the princess. The journey took days, and Aiden's water supply was running low. He had no choice but to keep pushing forward. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he reached the outskirts of the ancient city. The towering structures, broken and weathered by time, rose from the sand like the remnants of some forgotten civilization. He wasn't alone, though. He had barely stepped into the city when he was surrounded by Xiphian warriors, their eyes glowing with a fierce, unnatural light. They had been waiting for him, as if they knew he was coming. He drew his weapon, prepared for a fight, but the Scifians didn't make the first move. Instead, they stood there watching him with curiosity. "You are the one they sent?" a voice called from the shadows. A tall, hooded figure stepped forward. The Scifian leader, Aiden, assumed. "Do you think you can take what does not belong to you?" Aiden tightened his grip on his weapon. "I don't have a choice," he said. "I'm here for the artifact, and I'm taking it." The Scifian leader chuckled, his voice dark. "You are not the first to try. And you will not be the last." He raised his hand, and the warriors around him closed in. Aiden fought with everything he had. The Scifians were fierce opponents, their movements swift and brutal. It felt like hours had passed as he battled them, his body aching and covered in sweat. But he couldn't stop. He had a mission to complete. Every time he thought he had the upper hand, more warriors appeared, blocking his path. Just when he thought he might be overwhelmed, a sharp, high-pitched whistle cut through the chaos. The warriors froze, their attention shifting. The Scifian leader looked at Aiden, his eyes narrowing. "The princess has sent her dog to retrieve what is not hers," the leader spat. "She will pay for her arrogance." Aiden had no time to respond. The leader lunged at him, and they collided with a violent crash. They struggled, each trying to overpower the other. Aiden's heart pounded in his chest as the fight dragged on, each blow feeling like a hammer against his body. He could feel the weight of Seraphine's expectations bearing down on him. He had to succeed. He couldn't fail her. In the end, it was Aiden's determination that won out. With a final, well-placed strike, he incapacitated the Scifian leader. The remaining warriors hesitated, unsure of what to do. Aiden took advantage of their confusion, pressing forward and finally reaching the heart of the ruins. There in the center of the ancient city, he found the artifact. It was a small, intricately designed cube, its surface glowing faintly with a strange energy. Aiden didn't hesitate. He took the artifact and made his way back to the shuttle, feeling the weight of it in his hands. The mission was complete. When he returned to the capital, Seraphine was waiting for him. She didn't greet him with the warmth one might expect after such a dangerous mission. Instead, she looked at him with a calculating gaze, as if assessing his worth. Aiden stood before her, exhausted and battered from the fight, but his mission was successful. He had done what she asked. "You did well," she said, her voice colder than usual. "But this is only the beginning." Aiden felt a chill run down his spine. The princess was always looking ahead, always thinking about the next move. There was no time for rest in her world. "Thank you, Your Highness," he replied, unsure of what else to say. He had done his job, but he knew that his involvement in Seraphine's plans was far from over. The artifact was just a small piece of the puzzle, and he was now a part of it. He had proven himself to her, but at what cost? Seraphine looked at him, her gaze sharp. "There will be more challenges ahead, Lieutenant. You have earned your place, but now you must prove that you can handle what's to come." Aiden nodded. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He was no longer just a bystander in Seraphine's game. He was a player, and he would either rise with her or be crushed beneath her ambition. As the days passed, Aiden found himself drawn further into her world. The galaxy was on the brink of war, and Seraphine's ambition had no limits. She was a force of nature, and whether he wanted to or not, Aiden had become an essential part of her plans. But he still couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking a fine line, a line that could snap at any moment, plunging him into a future he wasn't sure he was ready for. Aiden stood at the edge of the balcony, staring out over the capital city. The skyline stretched out before him, a sea of towering spires and gleaming structures. The sounds of the bustling city below drifted up, muffled by the distance. But even with the magnificent view before him, Aiden felt a sense of unease that he couldn't shake. Things were changing, and with every passing day, he felt more and more like a pawn in Seraphine's game. Seraphine had been more distant lately, her focus sharper and colder than before. She had been preparing for something, but Aiden wasn't entirely sure what. He knew that the artifact he had retrieved from Xiphus was only one piece of a much larger puzzle, but he couldn't see the whole picture yet. Every time he tried to get closer to the truth, Seraphine pushed him further away, her plans more hidden than ever. The princess had always been a mystery, but now Aiden realized she was something more dangerous, an enigma wrapped in power and ambition. And as much as he had tried to remain loyal to her, he began to wonder if that loyalty was misplaced. Every day, he saw more of the lengths she would go to achieve her goals. The ruthlessness she hid behind her cold exterior was becoming clearer, and the galaxy's future was at stake. Her future. But Aiden wasn't sure if he could follow her any longer. He had always believed in duty, in honor, but Seraphine's plans were beginning to feel like a path toward destruction. He had seen the way she manipulated people, how she used those around her like tools to further her own ambitions. He wasn't naive. He had known that power came with a price. But as he looked at the cold reality of her vision, he couldn't help but question whether he was the price. The door behind him slid open, and Aiden turned to see Seraphine step into the room. She looked even more regal than usual, her dark hair falling in perfect waves around her face, her expression unreadable. There was a quiet intensity in her eyes that made his chest tighten. "You're still brooding, Lieutenant," she said, her voice smooth and controlled. "You're not one to waste time on regret." Aiden forced a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I wasn't aware I had time for regret." Her gaze softened slightly, though the hardness never left her features. "You don't, not when there's work to be done." Aiden hesitated. He wasn't sure how to approach her anymore. He wanted to ask her what her endgame was, what the galaxy would look like once she had achieved everything she wanted. But he knew better than to question her motives directly. That would be a sign of weakness, and Seraphine never tolerated weakness. "I've been thinking about our next steps," she continued, walking toward the table where a holographic map of the galaxy was displayed. "We need to act quickly. The coalition of systems opposed to us is growing. They think they can stop me. They're wrong." Aiden's stomach twisted. He had heard the whispers of the growing rebellion, the factions that were beginning to band together against Seraphine's rule. The galaxy was on the brink of war, and Seraphine was preparing for it with ruthless efficiency. "And what exactly is your plan?" Aiden asked, his voice more pointed than he had intended. "How far are you willing to go to achieve this?" Seraphine didn't look at him immediately. She simply studied the map, her fingers tracing the paths of the opposing factions. "I will do whatever it takes," she said quietly. "Whatever it takes to ensure the galaxy is united under my rule." Aiden felt a chill crawl down his spine. There it was again, the coldness in her voice, the absolute certainty that her vision was the only one worth pursuing. He had always known that Seraphine was determined, but this was something darker, something dangerous. "And what about the people?" he asked before he could stop himself. "What about the ones who are caught in the middle of all this, the ones who don't want to be part of your war?" Seraphine turned toward him, her eyes narrowing. "The people will adapt. They always do. Those who resist will fall. The weak will be crushed under the weight of their indecision." Aiden felt his chest tighten. "Is that really what you want, to rule over a galaxy of broken people?" "Not broken," Seraphine said, her voice cold but firm. "Ruthless, strong. People who understand that power is not given, it is taken." Aiden felt his heart race. He had known Seraphine was ambitious, but now he was starting to see the full scope of her vision. She didn't want to be a ruler. She wanted to be a god. And for the first time since he had met her, Aiden realized that he was standing on the edge of something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. "Are you afraid, Lieutenant?" Seraphine asked, her voice soft but probing. Aiden swallowed, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't afraid of her, but he was afraid of what she was becoming, of what she was asking him to become. "I'm not afraid," he said, though the words felt hollow in his mouth. She studied him for a moment, her eyes unreadable. Then she turned back to the map, her face hardening once more. "We leave for the Outer Rim tomorrow," she said. "There's a system there that holds the key to the next phase of our plans. I need you by my side, Aiden. I need you to be strong." Aiden didn't respond. He simply nodded, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. He was no fool. He knew the cost of following Seraphine, but was the cost worth it? Was it worth losing everything he believed in just to stand by her side? As the days passed, Aiden's doubts grew stronger. The rebellion was becoming more organized, more violent. Every time Aiden turned around, another system was falling into opposition. Seraphine's vision of a united galaxy was slowly turning into a war that threatened to tear everything apart. But Seraphine was unwavering. She was more determined than ever to see her plan through, and Aiden found himself torn between his loyalty to her and his growing realization that he was not just following her. He was becoming part of the destruction she was creating. Their next mission took them to the Outer Rim, where the heart of the rebellion was rumored to be located. As they prepared for the journey, Aiden couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to cross a line from which there would be no return. Seraphine had promised him that he would be by her side, But what did that really mean? Was he standing by her side as a partner, or was he simply being used as another piece in her game? The shuttle lifted off from the palace, the city below growing smaller with each passing second. Aiden glanced at Seraphine, who sat silently across from him. Her gaze was fixed on the stars outside the window, her face expressionless. Aiden had no answers, only questions. But there was one thing he knew for sure. Wherever this path led, it would change him forever. Whether that change was for the better or the worse, he wasn't sure. But there was no turning back now. The journey to the outer rim was a quiet one. Aiden sat in the shuttle, his eyes fixed on the stars outside, but his mind was far from the peaceful vastness of space. The weight of what lay ahead felt suffocating, like a storm on the horizon gathering strength with every passing second. He could feel the tension building, not just in the galaxy, but inside himself. Seraphine had been silent for most of the trip, her eyes closed as if in deep thought, her usual calculated demeanor unbroken. Aiden didn't dare disturb her. He had learned long ago that she didn't need anyone's presence, not even his. She needed obedience, loyalty, things that were becoming harder for him to give. The galaxy was at war. The rebellion had grown stronger, more coordinated. Systems were falling, one by one, as Seraphine's campaign to consolidate power reached a new phase. The Outer Rim was home to many of the systems that had turned against her rule, and Aiden knew that whatever happened next would either break her enemies or destroy everything they had worked for. He had heard rumors, whispers of what Seraphine had planned. She was preparing to launch a full-scale assault on the rebellion's heart to crush any hope of resistance. The galaxy would either bend to her will or it would burn. The thought made Aiden's stomach twist. He had seen the destruction that followed Seraphine's orders. He had been a part of it. But now, for the first time, he questioned whether the cost of her vision was worth the price. "We're approaching the Outer Rim," Seraphine's voice broke through his thoughts, cold and distant. She opened her eyes and glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Stay focused. The rebellion won't give us mercy, you know that." Aiden nodded, though he wasn't sure what he was agreeing to anymore. He had been loyal to her. He had followed her orders without question. But now, with the galaxy on the edge of chaos, he wasn't sure where that loyalty would lead him. The shuttle descended toward the planet's surface, the familiar hum of the engines resonating in the cabin. Aiden's heart raced, but it wasn't fear he felt. It was something more unsettling, a sense of dread, a knowing that whatever happened next would change everything. He had already seen the destruction caused by Seraphine's ambition. Would he be able to stop her if it came to that? As they landed, the doors of the shuttle opened to reveal the desolate landscape of the Outer Rim world. The planet was barren, its surface scarred by years of conflict. The capital city lay in ruins, the signs of an ongoing war everywhere. Aiden had seen this before. This was the cost of Seraphine's vision. "We're here," Seraphine said, stepping out of the shuttle with her usual grace. Aiden followed, but his steps were heavy. He couldn't shake the feeling that this would be the beginning of something irreversible. They were met by a group of Seraphine's most trusted commanders, each one a hardened veteran of the many battles that had come before. They briefed her on the status of the rebellion and their plans for the assault. Aiden listened in silence, but his mind kept drifting back to the same question. How far was Seraphine willing to go to achieve her goals? And how far was he willing to follow her? After the briefing, Seraphine turned to Aiden, her gaze sharp. "You'll be with me in the command center. There's no room for mistakes now." Aiden nodded again, though his thoughts were elsewhere. He had always trusted Seraphine's decisions, her strategies, but this time, something felt different. The rebellion had grown too powerful, and Seraphine's obsession with control was pushing her to extremes. He wasn't sure if he could stand by her side if this continued. They made their way to the command center, a vast underground facility located in the heart of the city. Inside, the walls were lined with holographic maps and projections, each one detailing the movements of both Seraphine's forces and the rebel factions. The room buzzed with activity as officers and strategists worked tirelessly to prepare for the final assault. Aiden stood beside Seraphine as she reviewed the plans, her eyes focused and intense. He could see the fire in her, the same relentless drive that had brought her this far. But he also saw something else, a coldness, an unyielding desire to crush anyone who stood in her way. The galaxy to her was a tool, and she would reshape it to suit her needs. "This is it," she said, her voice low. The final push. Once we destroy the rebellion here, we'll have no more enemies. The galaxy will belong to us. Aiden's heart pounded in his chest. The weight of her words hung in the air. He had heard the rumors, but now he could see it for himself. Seraphine wasn't just trying to unite the galaxy. She was trying to dominate it, to bend it to her will, and the rebellion was just the first step. If she succeeded here, there would be no turning back. She would have complete control. "You don't have to do this," Aiden said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. He wasn't sure why he said it, but the words slipped out before he could stop them. "There's always another way. We can still find peace." Seraphine turned to him, her eyes hardening. "Peace? What is peace to you, Aiden? It's weakness. The galaxy is built on power, and power is the only thing that matters." Aiden swallowed, the truth of her words sinking in. She had never cared for peace, for diplomacy. She had always been driven by the pursuit of power, and now he was beginning to understand just how far she was willing to go to achieve it. "Will you help me, or will you stand in my way?" she asked, her voice a quiet challenge. Aiden stood frozen, the weight of her question pressing down on him. He had always been loyal to her, but his loyalty was starting to feel like a betrayal, not just to the galaxy, but to the very ideals he had once believed in. "I'll follow you," he said, though the words felt hollow in his mouth. "But I won't be a part of your destruction." Seraphine studied him for a moment, her eyes searching for any sign of weakness. Then, without another word, she turned back to the map, her focus unwavering. The assault began the next day. Seraphine's forces moved swiftly, overwhelming the rebels with precision and force. Aiden stood at her side, watching as the battle unfolded, the sounds of explosions and gunfire filling the air. He couldn't deny that she was a brilliant strategist. Her tactics were flawless. But as he watched the destruction unfold, something inside him broke. The rebellion fought valiantly, but they were no match for Seraphine's forces. Aiden could see the fear in their eyes as they realized they were losing. But even as he felt sympathy for them, he couldn't bring himself to intervene. He had made his choice, and now he had to live with it. By the end of the day, the rebellion had been crushed. Seraphine stood victorious, her eyes cold as she surveyed the battlefield. Aiden felt a chill run down his spine. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment she had worked for. And yet, as he looked at the devastation around him, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Seraphine had won, but at what cost? The galaxy lay in ruins, its future uncertain. Aiden realized that he had been a part of something far greater than he had ever imagined, something that could shape the future of the entire galaxy. But as he stood there, he wondered if he had made the right choice. Could loyalty to Seraphine ever justify the destruction that followed? "Do you see it now?" Seraphine asked, turning to him with a cold smile. "The galaxy is mine." Aiden didn't answer. He wasn't sure what to say. He had followed her into the heart of the storm, and now he had to live with the consequences. The galaxy was hers, but at what cost? And where did he fit into this new world she had created? As the dust settled and the last remnants of the rebellion were wiped out, Aiden realized that he had crossed a line. He was no longer just an observer in Seraphine's world. He was a part of it, for better or for worse. And as he looked at the future ahead, he couldn't help but wonder if there was still a way out, or if it was already too late.